Hi, I'm Sean Faulkner from Kirsten, and today I wanted to talk to you about integrated pest management, and within that, integrated weed management. As a policy, the UK looks to be starting to move away from using chemicals such as glyphosate, etc., to treat plants in an amenity setting as much as possible. So the way they're looking to do that is by using integrated weed management policies. And I'd like to explain a little bit about what that might entail and how you might treat a weed differently when you're looking at it from an integrated point of view, as opposed to reactively treating it with pesticides. So over here behind me, I've got a selection of different sized plants. Now, when we're using glyphosate, we would tend to let the plant grow up to a fairly substantial size so that you've got lots of foliage for the chemical to be able to bond to and to work. If you try and treat the plant in the same way with a method such as heat, which I'll explain how it works in a moment, you get a bit of a different result. And one question I quite often get asked is, well, does the heat kill off the roots? And actually the stem of that question is coming from the way weeds are currently treated using glyphosate and trying to use a different method in the same way. And actually it works much better if you treat it in a different fashion. So whereas chemicals work much better on this thistle over here, or plants with a large foliage, actually when you're using a method such as heat, it'll work better on a small plant with very little leaf coverage, or even on a germinating seed. So the reason that is that to use any method that's using heat, what you're doing is you're heating the plant's leaves or the green cells up to about 85 degrees, and at that point they congeal or burst, and so they're no longer able to carry out the function of photosynthesizing. And what that does over a couple of days is it starves the plant. Now, if you do that on a plant that's very established, it has a deep root system, and it stores lots of energy in the root system and in the stem and the main body of the plant, and it can then use that once it senses that it's dying. It can use that to have a burst of foliage and regrow. Whereas a smaller plant hasn't got the energy in its root system yet to be able to do that. So one pass with some heat at that 85-degree temperature will kill it. So when you're talking about treating plants with heat, if you can then get on the plant much earlier in its life cycle, you're able to do a much more effective job with much fewer applications. If you try and use it from late May or June, and you're trying to treat larger plants, you'll kill the top of the plant, and that'll die off in a couple of days just the same, but then it will use the energy to regrow, and you'll have to treat it several times if you then let it come up to where you were before and then hit it again. So some people use a weediness scale, and they let a plant get to a certain size before killing it. And actually you need to be treating it quite quickly after you've killed it before to reduce all that energy and use up all that energy that it's trying to use to regrow. The other thing then we can do is to encourage the right types of plants on the surface. We can look at removing the soil or growing something else in the soil that it's using. So on a hard surface, there's not supposed to be any soil on the surface, so a tarmac surface or concrete. So on these types of surface, what we want to do is remove the growth medium that these plants are using. And perennials tend to need quite deep soil to be able to grow in, because mechanically the big tall structure requires a lot of support, and also to produce that much foliage, etc., they need lots of nutrients. So if you're removing that amount of nutrients from the soil by using something like a weed brush, you can get it back to a clean surface, and the only plants you're going to then get growing on the surface are things that require much less soil. So things like moss or small annual plants, which are much easier to kill with heat. So it means that you can do it in much fewer applications, much cheaper. The other thing you then want to focus on once you've looked at removing soil is, okay, let's minimize the amount of soil that can be produced on that surface in the first place. So the way on hard surfaces soil tends to build up is that organic debris from, which we call detritus, from tree leaves and branches and grass clippings, all congregate on the surface, and then they get blown into traps and stay there. So in block paving, they'll go in the gaps in the block paving, or they'll go up against the curb, and that's where you get the build-up. So we need to clean these areas to reduce the amount of soil and detritus that's becoming soil by degrading. But we also want to look at the surrounding area and minimise those sources of detritus. So if you've got a grass verge, you might think about replacing that with another material, such as some ground cover plant, which is cut far fewer times a year, producing much less clippings and other detritus. You might want to cut back tree foliage so that you've not got so many leaves dropping on the surface that's going to degrade down. So there's all that to think about. Then once you've got back to a clean surface, you start using things like sweepers to keep it maintained, and you can use products such as the weed brush. I'm going to hand over to Chris now, who's going to talk about a couple of the different products. So he'll talk you through weed brushing and sweeping, and he's also demonstrating the Ripper-Green thermal weeding lance, which is one of the products we do, which uses hot air to kill the plant.
So at Kirsten UK Limited, we do the range of Kirsten sweeping machines, weed brushes, and we also do the thermal weed control products from Hof and from Ripper-Green. So the range of sweeping machines is for removing the detritus from hard surfaces, including block paving, including tarmac, artificial surfaces. Detritus that, if that is left on the surface, will then enable seeds and weeds and undesirable plants to grow into that surface. So we have the K-series sweepers, and then we have this machine with the weed brush. So the sweepers work with a sweeping brush on the horizontal axis, which applies a pressure over the surface and sweeps in front of the surface. We can have collector boxes and gully brushes on the sweeping machines. The weed brushes tend to work on a vertical axis, and you can see the attack angle of these metal brushes in this case, which can penetrate the surface, and we can adjust the angle of the brush head, we can adjust the height of the brush head, and we can oscillate the brush from side to side as well. We've got a full range of these machines. They can also be used for where soil has encroached over the edge of the road surfaces, for path edging and knocking back that soil edge instead of spraying it and just leaving the detritus and soil there. So that's the difference between the sweepers and the weed brushes. We do pedestrian machines, tractor mounted machines, whatever size of area we need to remove that detritus from, we've got the machine to be able to do that efficiently. And then we've got the machines which will then fit onto your existing tractors, prime movers, to make those machines more versatile all year round. Once we've removed the detritus, and instead of having weeds up at this height, which could be tackled with the weed brushes quite successfully, but it is a waste of carbon to be tackling a weed of this sort of height. Ideally, we want to be tackling the weeds that are left and tackling them at this sort of height. And then those can successfully be done by the heat weed control, where we're bursting the cells of the leaf. So we just need to walk over the weed at a steady walking pace of a weed of this sort of size, get it up to about 85 degrees, which we can do. This machine is probably putting out 600 or 700 degrees, and we can just walk steadily along and at that sort of pace and be killing the weeds quite successfully, or bursting the cells in the leaf, which leads to the weeds starving to death essentially. The other thing we're doing by getting rid of the weeds early is we're preventing the seed bank from increasing. So if you think that as soon as we do something with this lovely thistle here, the next thing, it's the reaction from it is going to be depositing thousands and thousands of fresh weed seeds into the environment. We need to start reducing that that seed bank that's in the environment, waiting to find a suitable place to get into the detritus and grow again. If we can stop this cycle, then we're not spending whole heaps of carbon to deal with this. You imagine the carbon required to kill that compared with the carbon required to kill a plant like this. So we have to completely rethink about the way we do these things. The heat weed control machine, this from Ripper Green, they call it the mobility kit. It carries 5 kilos of gas on the back, and it uses a Venturi system at the top of the machine to increase the amount of air that we've got going down the pipe. So this is using about 4% gas and 96% air. So the efficiency of this lance that's been developed over the last few years is very great when you can consider perhaps an old Sheen paraffin weeder or something like that. So all the way round, we're understanding a little bit more what we need to do with these machines, and the machines are getting far more advanced, and the design is getting a lot better. So all these machines can be seen at the website at kirstenuk.com, plus a lot of more information which we've got on there. Please have a look at the news section, the blog section. It has got a massive amount of information that we've written, plus compiled from other websites, all to do with integrated pest management, and in our case, integrated weed management. So if you're here today, visit us on stand 11. We'd be very pleased to talk about integrate pest management and how you can slowly bring that in to perhaps replace some of the chemicals that you're currently using. Thank you very much.